because the political masters in these two spaces are different. I still think it's downright ridiculous that in South Africa today you can have a parent paying as much as 200,000 a year for a school of education. That's not how politics in South Africa work. You need to be on the ground. And the ANC set that tone. But we think there's more and more people coming online, engaging differently. Being on the ground in the future may mean being online.
The State of the Nation team is very excited to announce a partnership with Pace Car Rental. Pace Car Rental is one of the fastest growing car rental businesses in South Africa, with branches all over the country. They've got branches in Sandton, Kempton Park, Pretoria, Mhlanga, Gqeberha. Wherever you are, Pace Car Rental is there as well. A bold podcast like the State of the Nation needs a bold partner, and we have found that partner in Pace Car Rental. So why don't you support them? Joining us today as we head towards the 2024 general election, Jan Moganwa from CITIZANS. Jan, welcome to the State of the Nation.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you for the opportunity.
Now, you seem to be following a path that's become a little bit more well-trodden these days, right? It seems to me that CITIZANS is almost a think tank. It's a interest group, if one could put it that way, that may lead to a political formation in time, a little bit like Rivonia Circle giving life to Rise Mzansi, and we know that Build One South Africa started with some consultation. Tell us about CITIZANS.
It probably will go that way, Mike. I mean, as I say, thanks for the opportunity there. The important thing is, South Africans are trying to figure out what they can do. And I think for me, that's encouraging. We've got more and more South Africans who are saying, what can we do to build a better South Africa? And some of it will be through civic movement. To your point, some of it will be through think tanks, and some of it will be through politics. At this point in time, Mike, I'll take whatever I can if we are going to build a better South Africa. But from CITIZANS, the way we are thinking about this, our target is professionals primarily and the youth. Now, the base that makes up professionals is, of course, not the type of base that will win you elections, but this base is highly influential. But more important, that's where the skills base sit, right? And we feel until South Africa excites this group and get them to want to contribute towards building a better South Africa, then we're wasting time. So we set up CITIZANS, set up by professionals, to appeal to other South Africans to say, you can't keep on staying out of politics because politics really will find you. We suffer the consequences of politics, so you can't stay out. So we are looking to engage them, largely requesting them to contribute their skills and all of that. And of course, we also need funding, but we are not. We're looking for continuing small contribution by people instead of millions from one donor that may compromise what we stand for.
So far, have you had has it resonated at all with any of these professionals? Have you started to build up some following amongst professionals? What are you doing with those people that are becoming part of CITIZANS?
Absolutely. The engagement by professionals has been great. People have come to us now offering either ideas or change in proposals and policies and all of that. So we are seeing, people engaging. What we need to start to build now is the administration system to be able to collect all of that input and start to use it. That input has translated into what we call 7 priorities for South Africa that are available on our website, citizens.org, as you can see, spelled with a Z-A. And so that's going. And what we now need to do is to start to go out to more South Africans. Many of them have said to us, why do you not just go straight and contest elections? So we are registered with the IEC. We may appear on the ballot, which will be very interesting, given that we don't have the type of money that is required to be able to contest elections the way elections are being contested in South Africa today. We're largely online. And Mike, the pushback may be, but that's not how politics in South Africa work. You need to be on the ground. And the ANC set that tone, but we think there's more and more people coming online, engaging differently. Being on the ground in the future may mean being online. That switch will happen. You just cannot time it. So we'll rather be in it and prepare for that than to try and wait for that to change before we come in.
Yeah, although it does seem at the moment like everybody's trying to outdo each other with stadium events. I mean, that seems to be the current thing in South Africa. You know, obviously tone set by the ANC.
Oh, absolutely.
And now everybody seems to be renting stadiums. I don't know, Moses Mabhida Stadium must be making a fortune.
It must have made a few years ago, we were told it might not be viable, as is true for many of the Soccer World Cup stadiums that were built. But to your point, Mark, the politics in South Africa today has been, I'll call it, dumbed down because the tone has been set by the ANC, right? So it is the ANC. You know, in the Greek world, they talk about circuses and bread, right? So if you believe the people you are addressing are really not intelligent enough, just entertain them and feed them. Right? So that's the politics of South Africa today. Just get you a lot of entertainment and food and drinks, right? But interestingly, the newer parties who should be charting a different path are also trying to outcompete, the ANC at really a terrible approach that has been set. Yeah. That also informs, interestingly, I think the ANC has dumbed down all of us, including channel owners, podcasts, because the ANC also informs what we talk about. In the process, the ANC has made it about water running in the streets. And I'm not saying those things are not important. But Mike, no one is talking about the systemic issues that we need to be talking about.
Let's talk about those issues.
So let me give you an example, Mike. So I come from a village in Limpopo. My mom is now, the old lady's about 89 now, right? They have water running once a week, right? Now, if I say to anyone in the city, there is a village where water runs once a week, it sounds terrible, right? Except there never used to be any water, right? So to the people in the village, water running once a week is like a bit of a mini miracle, because before that, they would have had to figure out where water comes from. And so therefore, those people will continue to be loyal to the ANC, not because what they get is great, but because compared to where they come from, this is...
Yeah, you could almost argue that counterintuitively, if the water runs once a week, that link to the ANC becomes a little stronger because they're scared that the next party doesn't ever turn it on.
Absolutely.
As opposed to if you live in a suburb that where you've always had running water and it goes off one day a week, you're going to say, vote them out.
Absolutely. And the most recent memory was no water. You must understand that people compare. People always optimize versus options. The most recent memory would have been no water.
Yes.
So that rings a lot more relevant in people's heads than, but now, Mike, I was telling you that if I went to the old lady and I said, the old lady, we are citizens and we think many of these things are systemic issues. I think the long-term solution to the water problem is desalination infrastructure. Now I'm talking to my mom and she says, what does that mean? I said, Mom, this is not about the water coming from one village down. We need to get water from Durban, right? I can tell you, Mom is going to ask me a lot of questions around, are you okay? Are you stable and whatever? So, but should we be having desalination infrastructure as a serious conversation? Absolutely. But why is that not featuring in our conversation? because the ANC sets the tone for what we talk about. So in the process, the systemic issues that we need to be talking about are not spoken about. And I can give you many examples, Mike. So we talk about the cost of fuel and everything. We know that the relationship with that is the dollar-rand exchange rate. Mike, do you know that while we are talking about the nonsense that the ANC gets us to talk about, pension funds in South Africa can put up to 45% of South African pension funds offshore? Do you know that? Have you seen it anywhere? You will not see. But what are the implications of so much money of South African pensions going offshore? It deteriorates the value of the rand, right? Because there's more. We call it capital flight. It's not, and when we call it capital flight, we're making it like foreign investors are taking their money out. No, it is South African money that while we were being entertained by the circuses and the filling up of stadium, regulation was changed at the back and allowed more of South African pension funds to go outside. The implications of it is the deterioration of the rand-dollar exchange. It comes back as the higher cost of fuel. It comes back as the higher cost of food. So where is the space for these systemic conversations instead of what the ANC has reduced to food parcels and t-shirts? That's the struggle. But to find the audience that is willing to have this type of conversations, you have to accept that you appeal to a minority group for a long time. And that's why we see Citizens as a minimum 10 to 15 year project until we start to have critical mass to have meaningful influence.
So what would, in amongst your findings and on your pillars, what would be the first steps that citizens would like to influence in South Africa? Where are the critical things that we are getting wrong?
So there's a couple of things that we're getting wrong, So Mike, one of the things you need to understand is kind of like the psyche of South Africa is a very tribal country, and in the way we think about even something like race, actually race is just a tribe, and we are members of different tribes. Now I can be a member of different tribes. I'm black, I'm male. Those are all different tribes. But how do I get to identify with a particular tribe? It's usually the tribe that gives me the highest level of incentives or privileges. Whatever those are, they might be psychological and all of that. And this is why in South Africa today, you cannot find we cannot find too many people who supported apartheid, right? Because today, coming out and say I was a big supporter of apartheid does not come with privileges. What we know is that in 1992, white people were asked to vote on a referendum to say, does de Klerk continue with negotiations? I can tell you, you can search for this on the net. Much of Transvaal voted no, right? But today, in what would have made up Transvaal, you cannot find people, who were supportive. So there's a South African culture issue we need to deal that takes us away from the tribalism. The reason why but there will always be tribes. So we need to say, what is the South African identity? And this is where, Mike, I'm really upset with the current options we have. There are obsessions with being opposition. So there's a difference between being an alternative and being opposition. When you say I am opposition, it means your politics are informed by the incumbent. What is the alternative offer you are making to South Africa? You can't say that about many of the parties today. So to your question, we agree with many of the things around building a fair and prosperous and safe society. No one argues with that. But I think South Africa can also be a beacon of courage and creativity to the world. We need something positive to say about South Africa as part of building this new tribe and culture. And then we also boil it down to two values, accountability and transparency. If I take accountability as an example, we have to get all South Africans understanding that you have to work for what you get. We don't believe in grants in current format, as an example. So if we had our way, we'll scrap the child grant and we'll also scrap the 350 grant. Why? You should not be getting an income that you have not earned. What we will do instead, Mike, we will say, however, if you are not able to support your family, right, and you are doing all you can to look for opportunities and all of that, we will give you an allowance. Let's say that allowance is 1,500 a month, but that 1,500 a month requires you to work 60 hours a month in a community project or a social project and show that you are taking efforts to invest in yourself. Now, the parent can use the 1,500 to pay for their children. But think about the lady that does not have a child. That lady that does not have a child can use the 1,500 to do other things. Today, who's worse off, Mike? Who's worse off between a lady with 2 children and a lady who's with no children, who's continuing to try to invest in themselves? This lady is worse off because they don't have access to really a loyalty scheme that is being run by the ANC that gives people free money that they do not go out and earn. I have nothing against poverty. I grew up in poverty and unemployment and all of that. But we have to teach South Africans that the payoffs comes from the effort you put in. So that's broadly at a high level. Then we've got a number of priorities. Some of them that I know, I watch your channel a lot. We talk about transformation. So we've got the 7 priorities. Very quickly, the first one is clearly the issue of crime and looting. And by the way, the distinction between corruption and looting, Mike, in our view, governments are corrupt. What we are dealing with this government does no longer qualify as corruption. This is actually looting. The distinction is this. Corruption is, I need to build a road. This road is going to cost 100 billion. Corruption is, I have built a road. It is a quality road, but it has costed 120 billion. What we are dealing with today with this government is not that. We are dealing with, I'm going to build a road for 100 billion. It has costed 500 billion. There is still no road. That's not corruption, right? And that's where we think that requires a change. The current government cannot be saved. The party cannot be saved from itself. We'll talk about it when we talk about the political options. So we think there's work to be done there. Other priority, we talk about effective and efficient government. Again, the tone there is set by the ANC, right? South Africa is too small to have 9 provinces. What is the value of the provincial layer, right? It was put in place as a compromise between the National Party and the ANC to look after politicians. It's a patronage system. There are no laws, since there are not too many laws in South Africa that are done at a provincial level. But even new parties are not talking about taking away the provinces. Why? What is the value? The controversial one, as we are talking to people, is the thing about local government. Local government is not required. Local administration is required. The distinction is important. If you take Joburg, the nonsense we've been dealing with is not in relation to local administration. Local administration is the bureaucrats. It's the people who wake up, apply for a job and do their best. Where do you think they have been in the middle of this political circus? So we think in South Africa, much of what happens at a local level should be local administration. People must apply for jobs, have a performance contract, and have the necessary incentives. If it was administration, we will be able to say, we don't have an engineer in Hamatlala, but we've got an engineer in Cape Town. Can we ask the engineer in Cape Town to go and help us in Hamatlala in Limpopo? Do you know why we can't do that, Mike? We'll rather have the engineer in Cape Town idling even though there's a need in Limpopo. Why? Because the political masters in these two spaces are different, right? So we want those layers removed. The whole thing about reducing the number of ministries. But the one I'm most excited about, which I know gets you excited, is transformation, right? Mike, we think social transformation has to happen. We cannot have so many people in South Africa with nothing to lose. This is a time bomb, right? So in the social transformation, we touch on land, right? Our view is where government has we really support private property rights, to be clear, but we think where a land has to be expropriated for developmental reasons, our argument is that should be done at cost. Because the idea of taking property from someone without any payment is just downright ridiculous. And in any case, we've got some land that one can argue belongs to Lesotho and others and all of that. So we have to ensure land stops being a speculative asset because it is a resource we share, right? And it has to be available to generations. If you had a much more imaginative government, much of Dubai, by the way, is built into the sea. I think it's called the palms and all of that. We've been dumped down, right, to ridiculous levels of politics defined by the ANC. And then, of course, the other one is transformation in the workplace, and things like that. Transformation in the workplace has to happen. And I know many of people who watch your channel will differ. I come from corporate. I can tell you that the reason why there has not been sufficient transformation in corporate is not because of skills and meritocracy. That is absolute hogwash, right? Because so in South Africa, you've got about 400 companies on the JSE, right? Of those, less than, I think, about 10 to 15% have got senior, largely black management. If there were 400 CEO positions, you can't tell me that you cannot find 200 black South Africans who can be CEOs. But there still has to be space for white people in South Africa. That's why, the transformation thing, we need to continue to balance out. But the lack of transformation in corporate, I can tell you, is not because of skills. There are a lot of qualified black people who are busy being insulted because even when they are brought in, you hear about the imposter syndrome. You just have the sense that you don't belong here. And those are some of the things we need to change, Mike, on the transformation side. The other one we are passionate about is education. We think public schools should be compulsory boarding because the history of South Africa is that, if you think about people who became intellects and all of that and changed South Africa, a lot of them had to be taken out of dysfunctional society and be placed in an environment where they can get the appropriate support. South Africa has got about 23,000 or so public schools. To go and sort them out, because education has to be one of our big levers we pull. It will be hard to go and sort that out. But if you can create strong, properly capacitated infrastructure, good teachers, environment in a public school system, we are halfway there. We also take an issue with the cost of private education. We think private school fees should be regulated. I still think it's downright ridiculous that in South Africa today, you can have a parent paying as much as 200,000 a year for a school of education. We think that can be kept at something like 60,000 rand and it will still be viable. There are good private schools that charge that much. But South Africa has to say what are the things that are important that we are going to intervene on. Regulation does not mean private businesses will not play. I always say this. Petrol price in South Africa is regulated, but that has not stopped people from opening fuel stations. So those are some of the issues, Mark. I don't want to cover the whole thing. Digital comes out strong in what we talk about. The global topic is AI. and not AI as in is a catchphrase. And I hear people like throwing these things in, yeah. But AI is a big thing we need to grapple with.
So, Jan, hearing those various pillars and that you've come up with, barring the tweaking of the social grant system to one that makes perhaps a bit more of an incentive for people to get out the same, it sounds exactly like I'm talking to an ANC politician, because it's almost everything that they have spoken about. It seems like there's nothing new here other than maybe a tweaking, as you say, of the 350 grant, and everything else is exactly what we have at the moment. So therefore, what is the appeal of Citizens?
Not at all. So I'm giving you examples, Mike. So for example, South Africa government needs new sources of income, right? Yeah. One of the sources of income is we can build a data business, right? So government is the biggest repository of data, right? So if you can have entrepreneurs building businesses on the back of government data, someone can build a crime prevention app, right? That crime prevention app can access all sorts of data that government has that can show you the hotspots and what is prevalent and the times and all of that. We lack imagination, right? Yeah. The ANC has gone on and they like drawing a laundry list of stuff that needs to be done. So if you take any political player, you will find that there's an overlap in policies between them and the ANC, because the ANC tends to cover everything, right? But the distinction is, do you have the imaginative, the clear people, the people with the clarity to know what needs to be done, and that has not been the case.
Yeah, one would imagine the problem with a crime prevention app is that the first person to download it would be the criminals, and they'd know exactly where not to go.
Yeah,
but what I'm sort of looking for is a point of difference, a point where Citizens, either as an organization that influences or potentially as a political movement down the line.
Yes.
Right? What I'm hearing is we're going to do the same things, we're just going to do them better.
It's not the same, Mike. So where have you had the plan around let's change public schools into a boarding system?
Yeah, look, I mean, it obviously wouldn't be a cheap exercise, one would imagine.
No, actually, you'll be surprised. South Africa spends the highest on education relative to countries our size, but our throughput is terrible.
Yes.
So in South Africa, actually, interestingly, we don't have we don't have a money problem. We have a prioritization problem, yeah. Mike. So we spend more than many countries on the continent, Kenya and others, per child, but our throughput is different. So you don't hear anyone saying, because the thing about sorting out education is education you don't just sort out because you put the best teacher in front of the child. It is what the child eats. It is what they do after school. It is the environment they are in. So we've got children, they come from broken societies, broken families, broken teachers, broken infrastructure. Right? Where is the idea? So one of the most, popular schools that produced many of the intellects we know today, is Lovedale School in the Eastern Cape. What was different about it? It is because someone decided, I'm going to take these people away from a dysfunctional society, put them in an environment, and that's what gave us Govan Mbeki, Chris Hani, Steve Biko, and all of that. Where is that?
Right.
Where is that imagination? Right?
You don't think the real imagination comes in fixing that dysfunction?
Yes, that's part of the dysfunction. No, remember, the two parts of government, Mike, is governance and then there's policy, right? The fact that you can have good people, but those are administrators. I don't think having good administrators is going to, and that's where we think the DA probably is going wrong, right? Just having good administrators is not going to be sufficient to deal many of the issues. You still need public policy. That's a lot more clear, a lot more imaginative. We are suffering on both ends at the moment. And I'm afraid even some of the newer parties, they are falling back into, we want to be a quasi-DA. which I think is not going to be sufficient.
But now I'm confused because earlier on you said that the future is with good administrators.
Partly, right? Good administration is not going to solve the transformation challenges that we still have to tackle, right? You can have a good housekeeper. We call these groups of parties housekeepers. Mike, if you've got a good housekeeper, they will keep the house clean, things are running, meals are cooked, right? That is not going to be the person that does the renovation of the house, right? So to just have good housekeepers is not going to be adequate. What we need is a lot more around what type of house do we want to live in the future. That does not come from the cleaner. It comes from a different place, right? You can run a bad system well. Slavery at some point was legal. You can have an administrator that runs the slavery system well. That does not mean slavery is good. At some point, you need to have someone who says, I need to abandon slavery and do something different. But whatever that something different is, you still want to run it well.
Okay, so you said that you're speaking to a lot of professionals. And one of the real problems we've got in South Africa is one of a massive unemployment rate, which comes out of a stagnant economy with no growth.
Yes.
So when you get into the room with these clever professionals, they must have an idea as to how we could kickstart the economy. And I'd imagine this is now playing absolutely into your sweet spot.
Yeah.
How do we get this economy improving?
So the answers are, interestingly, Mike, South Africans don't differ too much on what the solutions are. And it's the usual place, is get the small and medium enterprises functioning. Right. And then, give them the necessary support and all of that. The role of government is to create the enabling environment for that.
Okay. So where's the current government going wrong then?
Well, on many fronts. So, for example, Mike, you run a small business, right? How much time do you have to allocate towards administration? There's this filing, that. And then, of course, there's things like being taken to the CC. I'll talk about labor laws just now, by the way, and the BEE stuff that I know have featured a lot in your conversation. We have sufficient resources that are sitting in CIFA, in IDC, in all of these developmental agencies. They are bogged down by red tape, right? We have to make it easy. So there's an index that's being produced that talks about the ease of doing business by country. South Africa has always lingered somewhere at the bottom. And is how do we become a business friendly? Yeah, there's things like energy and all of that, but the discussions in South Africa understandably have been dominated by load shedding. But even when we had all the electricity, we make it sound like when we had all the electricity, things were okay. They were not. The red tape that small, medium businesses have to go through does not augur well for an environment where you are trying to encourage people to start businesses. No wonder the talk is jobs, right? I think there will always be people in jobs, of course, but the obsession does not have to be as high as it is if we made it easy for people to start businesses and support them through the process. Now, South Africa is a small country. We're going to have to import spending power, right? Spending power means you're going to have to make, people importing stuff from South Africa, people coming to South Africa as tourists, because that's how we import spending power. But to import spending power, it then comes back to the issue of safety and all of that. So these things are all connected, Mike. You can't just say, I'm going to have a whole lot of people starting businesses. Let's even call it zero tax for SMEs up to 5 million of profit. Where is the spending power? South Africa has got a declining spending power. We need to import spending power. But for people to come here and spend time here, they need to feel like it is safe to be here. Interestingly, if you take something like Amsterdam, in many of the developed Rio and New York and whatever, it does not mean you are safe everywhere. Right? So if you are in Rio, they will say, do you want to go to the favelas? And if your answer is yes, they'll say, okay, please leave all your valuables, right? But if you're in the middle of the city, Rio, you walk around with your watch and all of that. The problem in South Africa is not so much that we've got crime that's different to the problem in South Africa is you can be robbed the same way in Alexander as you can be robbed in the middle of Sandton City. Amsterdam has got a red district. You call it their Hillbrow. But when you go there, you know what you take. So these things are all connected, but the biggest lever has to be enabling people to start businesses.
Okay, and the labor issue?
No, the labor issue is actually very interesting, Mike. I mean, interestingly, when labor conversation comes up, one of the things that people bring up is the idea of minimum pay is a problem in a country like South Africa and all of that. And I mean, I can have, if you look at the history of South Africa, there's three players. There's politicians, there's society, there's business. I think the party that has gotten away with murder more than anyone is actually not politicians. It's big business. And I know, you might be surprised to hear that. But a lot of what became political decisions, including things like land dispositions and all of that, they were in the service. They were in the service of big business. Big business wanted to extract cheap labor from the rest of the country, right? If you think about the Calabar that introduced these jobs can only be taken by white people, right? That was in cahoots between the politicians. So I feel like, and what are the incentives? Big business is not bad, right? They are profit businesses. They are capital accumulation processes. So the cheapest form of labor is a slave, right? Like, think about it. So, once it turns out we can't enslave people, we have made them irrelevant. So that's why the investment is in technology. Because a robot can work 24 hours without joining a union, right? So to come back to the issue of labor, people make up an issue with the minimum wage. But in a discussion, when we follow it back and say, you have repeated this thing so much, what is the minimum wage in South Africa? Do you know, Mike, what is the minimum wage?
No.
Take a guess per hour.
I think it's 20 Rand or
25 Rand.
25 Rand, right?
It's about 25 Rand, right? 25 Rand means an adult working for you for 8 hours a day for 200 Rand. So when you hear a person complaining about minimum wage, they are complaining about paying an adult 200 Rand at the end of a workday. Mike, if you're complaining about 200 Rand for 8 hours of work by an adult, you are looking for a slave.
Yeah.
You're not looking for an employee. So we must be careful about these things that keep on being repeated, because when you actually say, no, hold on, what are we actually talking about? You will be ashamed because you will realize, shit, I cannot believe that I've been defending paying an adult less than 200 Rand.
Yeah. Although I must say, I haven't heard the argument about minimum wage as being an argument in ages.
Oh, no, but it continues to feature about it. It comes in as part of the migrant labor issue, Mike. So when we say, what is the issue with the illegal migrants, right? What do we hear? We hear South Africans are lazy, don't want to work, or they want to knock off at 4 p.m. and whatever. You are looking for a slave. You are looking for a slave. The migrant workers, because they have less protections of their rights, they get to be used for 16 hours. They are being sent to fetch the children, do this, whatever. Mike, that's not a sign of a hard worker. That's a sign of a slave. And by the way, this is not new. When the Cape was set up, initially, the Dutch sought to bring poor white people to the Cape. They were not looking to exploit the locals. They brought people from Europe, poor people from Europe. Quickly, they said the same thing. These people like partying too much. They're always drunk. They are lazy. By the way, we like the locals, right? Why? They took them in as slaves.
Yeah.
The Great Trek was triggered by the end of slavery in the Cape in 1834. The Afrikaners said, if you cannot allow us to have slaves here, we're going to find our own slaves. Business people have always been looking for slaves,
Yeah. So now, looking forward, we've got an election coming up.
Yeah.
You may or may not appear on our very long ballot paper.
It's going to be a long ballot paper.
Do you think any of your policies are going to feature?
No, but so the way we think about it, Mike, is that these are the policies we want to offer to South Africa, right? Yeah, we've made it very open. It's not Bible stuff that says you either follow, EFF has got pillars that they say these are non-negotiable. If you go on our website, you will see that anyone can go and contribute and say, no, actually, but you must motivate it. You must tell us why that's a bad idea. So we would love it if many of the ideas we have come up with, people take on, because none of us are full-time politicians. We'll rather be doing other things, including you, Mike. If I said, go to parliament for 1.2 million a year, will you stop what you're doing for that, right? So those are the challenges. But in terms of how we see these elections playing out, Mike, the biggest game changer is MK. The tone in South Africa in politics is set by the ANC. So one of my obsessions, maybe a small diversion. My obsession is human behavior. If you go through the literature of human behavior, it boils down to people are driven by self-interest. But one of the things I find in all people, they say there's two emotions that drive your behavior. And there's a lot, but you can sum it as fear and love, right? Fear and love. Fear is what gets you running and finding enemies and all of that. Love is a lot more, how do I embrace others? Part of the problems that's interesting about South Africa today is if you think which party is a lot more embracing and love, probably that party is the ANC. ANC is terrible to everyone. It's like a horrible grandmother that punishes everyone, We don't like the love. It's like, I said ANC to the black Africans is a bit professional. It's a bit like an uncle who funded your studies but abused you, The rest of the parties, I want to call them ANC supporters, these parties, because the tone of what they talk about is set by the ANC. They are obsessed with being the opposition to the ANC. And therefore, they talk about the ANC more than they talk about what they offer. They are not alternatives. There's a difference between opposition and alternative. Sell us an alternative vision. You cannot list an alternative other than maybe the DA on administration, which, by the way, is competition with the bureaucrats, right? What is the thing? What is the dream you are selling South Africa? So we need to have more of that. So the biggest enemy to the ANC is going to lose power not because of a particular opposition party. It's going to be by fragmentation of the ANC. ANC will lose power to the ANC. If you go back to the history of the ANC, anywhere where they've lost mass, supporters, it has been because of a breakaway, right? That breakaway, the first post-democracy was, of course, COPE. COPE went to elections without much of policies. They got just over 7%. The next, and that, there was a view that Mbeki is behind it, but he never came out to say, he was supportive. Then EFF. EFF, these people did not come out at the top of the ANC. You have to understand, they were running the youth league. But when they went to elections, their first election, they got 5%. MK with Zuma, right? If you use that as the benchmark, you have a person who has reached the highest level of the ANC, knows how the machinery works. He goes to a breakaway party. I know people are trying to make it a KZN issue. I think that's just sweet nothings people are telling each other. I will be surprised, Mark, I will dare say that. I'll be surprised if MK comes anywhere short of 15%.
Wow.
I'll be surprised.
That's a very big call by Jan. Thank you, Jan Moganwa. from Citizens. Go out and check their website, citizens.org. If you enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe to the State of the Nation. Jan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very
To
much.
everybody that watched this, I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon on State of the Nation. Thank you.